ditentukan oleh hanya eksekutif, tapi ada yang namanya participatory budgetary process. Nah, di situ setiap orang yang berumur 16 tahun ke atas bisa berpartisipasi dalam proses pembuatan budget. Jadi apabila pemerintah kota merencanakan untuk membuat gorong-gorong dan kemudian mereka membuat budgetary processing, kita bisa datang ke pertemuan itu dan kita bisa protes. Dan trennya justru pada saat ini malah banyak anak-anak muda yang ikut berpartisipasi dan ingin terjun kepada sistem politik. Itu khususnya di Amerika ya. Tentu saja yang elected official atau yang terpilih tetap disproportionately old. Mereka tetap banyak orang tua yang terpilih. Tapi memang partisipasi anak muda mulai bergerak karena yang bergerak ke arah muda, sehingga para politisi kalau ingin menangkap suara-suara yang ada itu harus bergerak. Nah, ini ditangkap oleh kaum muda di Amerika, sehingga kaum muda di Amerika juga berusaha membuat demand. Mereka tidak hanya ingin masuk ke partai politik, tapi bisa mereka cukup membuat demand dari organizing, kemudian protes, atau bertemu dengan legislator yang di Amerika itu sangat mudah sekali. Karena legislator itu bisa kita datangi kapan saja, tidak seperti di Indonesia yang harus melalui masa rises. Oke, apakah ada pertanyaan berikutnya? Oh, Profesor, ya.
I think this question came from Aisha, who had some, I think, very valuable comments earlier on before the question. And I would totally agree with her that the vast majority of ways in which the youth are involved in public policy is as targets of implementation. So basically, right, policy is designed by adults, and then maybe the youth are invited to participate, but on the implementation side. And that's a significant challenge, not just in Indonesia, but the US as well. And that is why there needs to be more pressure put on participation earlier in the policy process. And you also specifically mentioned the question about the effort to create a disability-friendly city. And I don't know if you were referring to, but Kota Kita, which is based in Solo, has been involved in this kind of work. And maybe that was what you were referring to. That, I think, is an example of the kind of more innovative participatory work that's done earlier in the policy process, which is in the process of doing the assessment and designing the policies rather than just implementation. And I think that's an example of where Indonesia is well ahead, for example, of many kind of US cities thinking about a different kind of a process for thinking about that. And that is showing that it can be done, that it's a way forward, and that in the short term, the most likely places where that will happen will be at the local level and probably not at the national level. That's true in the United States, it's true in Europe, and I think it's probably true in Indonesia.
Okay. Very interesting, Professor. I've heard about Kota Kita in Solo, but I've never even read about it, and you actually are probably more knowledgeable to the Kota Kita in. So yeah, I would say though that in Indonesia, a lot of the collective action are based on small town. But even if they are successful in the small town, a lot of the politician in the bigger city in Indonesia doesn't really adopt that, because it's just like they are thinking, oh, it's a small town movement, I don't need it, I don't need the food and everything. Untuk teman-teman di Indonesia, jadi contohnya adalah Kota Kita di Solo, itu contoh salah satu collective action yang berhasil, yang dibuat oleh generasi muda. Nah, Profesor George Grossman juga menyatakan bahwa kemungkinan besar bahwa collective youth action itu tidak akan bekerja di level nasional, tapi lebih banyak di level lokal. Sehingga hanya karena kita tidak bisa membuat perubahan di level nasional, kita tetap harus bisa membuat collective action apa yang bisa berbuat di level lokal, yang bisa membuat perubahan. Contohnya misalnya kota dengan disabilitas yang dipertanyakan oleh Aisyah. Okay, so Professor, that was actually the last question. So because we are limited by time, if you would like to make a closing remark, because I remember you also have a takeaway slide. Please, thank you.
Yeah, sure. So I'll just won't show the slide. I'll just say what the takeaways are. So I think what's important to think about, even though the youth are a large number of people, that they're still not the majority. So that I think one of the challenges for thinking about expanding space for youth participation is to think about when the appropriate strategy is confrontation and protest, as happened during Reformasi, as happened in 2019, and when it's time to find coalitions and allies who kind of share your perspective. I mean, it's ultimately true that the powerful never concede anything without a demand being placed upon it. But building resources, which often require coalitions, including with coalitions of people who are older, are important. The second thing is social media is great, but we have to be able to find ways to combine the high-tech parts of our lives with the high-touch parts of our lives, and that we sometimes mistake online engagement as substantive a form of engagement for policy change. And all the evidence is that the online platforms are great for helping to organize people, but they can't substitute for kind of in-person organizing. And finally, policy is about the state, but it's not just about the state. It's also about corporations, civil society organizations, expanding the space for deliberative conversations across generations, across ethnic and religious divides, across class divides for that matter, and thinking about building a civil society of tolerance and deliberation. And that is a challenge that's increasingly difficult, again, in Indonesia, the United States, elsewhere. So that thinking about building the space for effective youth participation is not just with respect to the state. And thank you all very much for this opportunity to chat with you today. And thanks, Rongo, for making this happen. And thank you to the faculty at the university for facilitating this.
Thank you, Professor. So actually, Professor,
Thank you, sir.
yeah, before you were leaving, can I take 2 minutes to interpret you, and then we take a picture, and then you can leave? Yeah. So
Absolutely.
according to Professor, yeah. So actually, I also have one thing to say about your point number 2. We have in Indonesia what we youth call viral-based policy. So whenever there's something going viral in Indonesia, the authority will act upon it. But it's no, actually there are no formal mechanism. It's just whatever goes viral, and the authority will act upon it. Jadi teman-teman, menurut Profesor John Gershman, ada 3 takeaway yang bisa diambil. Yang pertama adalah untuk meningkatkan partisipasi orang muda, tidak bisa hanya kita mengandalkan koalisi atau gerakan, tapi kita juga harus deliberate dan berkoalisi dengan generasi lebih tua yang memang sudah memiliki power. Jadi kita tidak bisa hanya idealis kemudian mengandalkan gerakan generasi muda untuk kemudian protes, konfrontasi, tapi kita juga harus menggerakkan dan berkoalisi. Jadi namanya politis adalah tidak mungkin kita hanya bisa bergerak sendiri. Kita juga harus give to take something, dan orang yang powerful memiliki authority tidak akan pernah memberikan powernya tanpa ada pressure. Sehingga kita lah yang harus membuat pressure melalui berbagai koalisi atau gerakan. Dan yang kedua, kita harus mengombinasikan antara high tech dengan high touch. Di Indonesia, viral based policy atau sosial media kan itu sangat powerful sekali. Tapi menurut Profesor John Gershman, jangan menyamaratakan antara sosial media viralnya dengan substantif policy gitu loh. Jadi kalau hanya viral saja tapi tidak ada mekanisme untuk membuat hal yang viral, kita hanya heboh di Instagram, kita hanya heboh di Twitter, tapi tidak bisa menggerakkan policy yang ada, percuma. Kita akan protes tentang misalnya kenaikan harga BBM di Instagram tapi tidak ada yang bergerak, ya percuma juga. Jadi jangan mistake the social media sebagai sebuah effective engagement policy. Mereka hanya sebuah media komunikasi. Dan yang ketiga adalah the policy is about the state but not just the state. Jadi kebijakan itu adalah tentang memang pemerintahan, tapi tidak hanya tentang state. Kita bisa bergerak untuk ada juga yang namanya korporasi di private sector, kemudian civil society organization, dan civil society itself gitu. Jadi policy itu tidak hanya di government, tapi ada juga di arena-arena lain yang bisa kita menangkan dan bisa kita lawan untuk kita mobilisasi. Jadi jangan terpaku hanya yang bernama policy itu hanya ada di government saja. Oke. So terima kasih. Thank you very much, Professor John Gershman, for being here, and I would like to also extend my gratitude from everybody here. And Ms. Risa, would you like to help us take a picture with Professor John Gershman?
Yes. Thank you so much, Professor, for your time. It was a great pleasure to having you here. Okay. Sebelumnya kita take a picture dulu ya. Oke, siap admin. Kita lihat 1, 2, 3. Oke. Semua buka cam ya, on cam. Oke, sekali lagi. 1, 2, 3.